So growing up, when you're trying to find out the things that you like and the things that you're good at, I realized very quickly that sports was not going to be where I fit in. I called myself athletically challenged. And music, I enjoyed singing in a choir. I attempted piano for a little bit. I was just frustrated that I wasn't instantly good at it and didn't have the patience to keep it going. What I found my passion was theater and was writing. And I was really lucky for quite a number of years to work closely with my congregation at home, acting in, writing in, directing even productions that we would do through our church. And it's been a long time since I sat down and wrote. When I was back home visiting a couple weeks ago, I found a book in my mother's bookshelf because it's wonderful when you're working in lay ministry and you have a mother who's an ordained minister, you just have a whole lot of resources available to you. I found a book that was Monologues of Biblical Women. And I thought that was a fascinating concept for many, many reasons. So I took it home and I read it, or read parts of it. And then recently, when we had a change in schedule, and I said I would offer a reflection today, I took a lot of inspiration from that book, and I wrote a piece from the perspective of Mary, because far too often the women in our biblical stories, we don't hear their voices as much. And so I'll share with you today a reflection, hopefully to get you into the spirit of Advent and the spirit of waiting. And it is waiting for hope. I remember the night the angel appeared. Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. I was afraid, very afraid. But sensing how I felt, the angel continued, Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. I may have been young, but I was old enough to understand how life was brought into the world. See, I was only 14 when that angel visited. Not an uncommon age to be wed, but there was the problem. I was not wed. My husband-to-be, Joseph, was a good man, a kind man, and a righteous man. A man who could have me shunned or stoned for my situation. But without truly understanding why or how or what was about to happen, I replied to the angel, I am the Lord's servant. Let it be with me just as you have said. It was like I was speaking the ancient words. We are the clay. You are the potter. All of us are the work of your hand. I was there to be worked on through God and by God, and only God knew how we are to be used. It's a fantastical story, isn't it? One that is almost too much to believe. But there is so much truth in our stories. I grew up reading stories, so many stories of amazing and holy prophets. I read about Moses, who brought the word of God down to earth, about Isaiah, who saw God in a vision and who shared with others God's absolute holiness, and Elijah, who performed God's miracles on earth and was taken into heaven. And while they were rarely recorded, my mother told me the stories of the women who shared God's holy work. All of them, with their words and their actions, brought hope to the people who were waiting for God to appear. Could I be like them? Could this be what my people were waiting for? Am I to bring hope to my people? I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. Instead, I traveled to see my cousin, Elizabeth. There was nobody who would understand more than her, more than she would. Because 6 months earlier, the angel had visited Zechariah and told him Elizabeth would have a child. As are most miracles, this was far beyond what Zechariah could understand. See, while I was young, Elizabeth was not. She and her husband were far beyond childbearing years. Just as my baby was a miracle, so was hers. But while I was filled with anxiety and uncertainty, Elizabeth was filled with joy. She had desperately wanted to be a mother, and they had prayed for years to have children. Even when hope for the future was rationally gone, they kept their faith. They kept waiting, and they kept praying to be used by God in whatever way God saw fit. I arrived and I was so nervous. I didn't know what to say. And thankfully, I did not need to say anything, because as soon as I entered their home, Elizabeth rushed to me, shouting, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear." She was so joyous, so full of hope for the future of our children. She told me that the angel had said to her that her child would do wonderful things and make ready a people for the Lord. But what did that mean? If her child was to make way for the Lord, what did that mean for my child? I remembered the words of the prophet Isaiah, who said that the Messiah shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, and King of Kings. And this was all too much. I collapsed next to her, exhausted from the journey, exhausted from the entirety of it all. I cried. I cried tears of one with no hope. How could I explain this? Who would believe me? Elizabeth understood. Because even if people did not really believe what happened to her, she was protected. She had a husband. Stroking my hair, she whispered, "Tell him you were raped by a soldier. He will show mercy." And for a moment I considered it. I stayed with Elizabeth for 2 more weeks before returning home. I had prayed for guidance and strength, and it was time to speak to Joseph. When I returned, I started to explain everything that had happened. But unbeknown to me, the angels, they heard my prayers and they had visited him. And so we prepared to be wed. 3 months later, Elizabeth had her baby. A beautiful boy that, despite much confusion from those around them, they named John. See, traditionally, boys especially were given family names, but they listened to what the angel said, and they named him what they were instructed. When the time came for me to have my baby, well, you already know that story. The night was still. Visitors had not yet arrived. I was holding him. And at that moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. I had been waiting for so long to meet him. And now he was here. I looked deep into his eyes, my beautiful baby boy. Have you ever looked into the face of a newborn baby? I mean really looked. Every baby is beautiful, and I certainly believed, as most mothers do, that mine was the most beautiful at all. But more so than that, when you look into a baby's eyes, you see that they are pure innocence. They are pure hope. Safe in a mother's arms, all a baby knows is love. And they have no reason to believe anything else exists in the world. They have no reason to know of heartache or tragedy or fear. They have no reference to pain or suffering. When they are hungry, they are fed. When they are cold, they are clothed. When they feel alone, they are comforted by loving arms. And as I was holding him, he cried. Just a small whimper, really. And it was then that I knew. This was the sign of hope that we have been waiting for. The sign of God's love that had been foretold for so long had arrived. Not through a royal king, not through a grand parade or the trumpets of 1,000 angels, but through the quiet cry of a newborn baby. Throughout my years, I had other children, and each time that waiting period between finding out about that new life and meeting my child filled me with the greatest sense of hope. It was God's promise fulfilled over and over again on God's love here on earth. Waiting to meet someone, waiting for that sign, waiting and knowing that hope will come. That is the meaning. That is the message. And that is what we remember.